JetBlue Flight 292. On September 21, 2005, JetBlue Flight 292 turned into an unforgettable drama in the skies. The Airbus A320 named Canyon Blue left Burbank bound for New York, carrying 140 passengers and 6 crew members. Minutes after takeoff, the pilots realized the nose landing gear was jammed, twisted at a full 90 degrees. That left the plane circling for hours while millions on the ground and even the passengers on board watched the emergency unfold live on DirecTV. Captain Scott Burke, with more than 10,000 flight hours, kept control as the jet burned fuel in a looping figure-8 pattern. The A320 couldn't dump its 46,860 pounds of fuel, so the crew had to waste time in the air until the aircraft was light enough to attempt a landing. Down below, emergency crews lined up at Los Angeles International Airport, prepared for the worst. Fire trucks and ambulances stood ready as the plane approached one of LAX's longest runways. At 6:20 p.m., the nose wheel hit the ground, shooting sparks and flames across the runway. Yet, Burke's precision flying kept the jet balanced on its main gear as long as possible, easing the crippled nose down with remarkable control. The aircraft finally rolled to a stop just 1,000 feet from the end of the 11,096-foot runway. Not a single person was hurt. Passengers calmly exited by stair truck, a surreal end to a flight that had gripped the nation on live television. The cause was later traced to worn seals and issues with the brake steering control unit. Airbus redesigned the system, but this was not an isolated case. Dozens of A320s worldwide had suffered similar failures. Even so, Flight 292 stood out for its high-stakes spectacle, the calm professionalism of its crew, and the eerie fact that passengers literally watched their own crisis play out on TV. Air France Flight 358. On an August afternoon in 2005, Air France Flight 358 left Paris with 309 people on board bound for Toronto. The journey was routine until the plane approached its destination. Severe thunderstorms had already forced more than 500 flights to cancel or divert. Yet, Flight 358 was cleared to land. The descent quickly turned into chaos. Pounded by sheets of rain and powerful winds, passengers later compared the impact to a car accident that just keeps going. The landing proved disastrous. The Airbus A340 touched down nearly halfway down a 9,000-foot runway, the shortest at the airport. With precious little space left, a tailwind pushing the plane forward, and delayed use of thrust reversers, the aircraft had no chance of stopping. At over 90 miles per hour, it tore past the runway, plunged into a ravine, and smashed into a creek bed 1,000 feet beyond before bursting into flames. What followed defied belief. The plane was destroyed. Yet every single one of the 309 passengers and crew survived. The evacuation was nothing short of heroic. Completed in under 90 seconds, the aviation gold standard. People stumbled out into the storm, climbing the steep ravine toward an 18-lane highway where drivers stopped to help, ferrying the injured to hospitals. Investigators later pieced together the causes: poor weather, a dangerously late touchdown, and critical delays in braking actions. The aftermath stretched beyond survival. Air France pursued $180 million in damages against Toronto airport authorities, while passengers secured a $12 million settlement. This crash was more than an aviation close call. It forced the industry to confront hard lessons: the need for sharper pilot training in brutal weather conditions, and the importance of stronger runway safety measures. In the end, it wasn't just survival that was miraculous. It was the speed at which chaos turned into escape. British Airways Flight 38. On January 17, 2008, British Airways Flight 38, a Boeing 777 with 152 people on board, approached London's Heathrow Airport after a 5,000-mile journey from Beijing. The descent seemed routine until the aircraft suddenly lost thrust on both engines just seconds from touchdown. At 720 feet, the pilots demanded more power, but the engines failed to respond. By 200 feet, speed dropped dangerously low, forcing the crew to stretch the glide, reduce drag, and aim for survival. The jet cleared traffic on the A330 by only a heartbeat, before slamming into the grass 890 feet short of the runway. The impact tore off the landing gear, ruptured fuel tanks, and punctured the fuselage, scattering wreckage across the airfield. One passenger suffered a broken leg and concussion, while 46 others sustained minor injuries. Yet against all odds, every soul survived. Emergency crews rushed in, dousing fuel leaks from nearly 15,000 pounds of spilled kerosene, narrowly avoiding what could have been a catastrophic fire. The investigation uncovered an elusive culprit: ice crystals in the jet fuel. Hours of cruising in frigid Siberian air allowed microscopic water particles to freeze inside the fuel lines. When thrust was demanded on final approach, the ice dislodged and clogged the fuel oil heat exchangers in both Rolls-Royce Trent 800 engines, starving them of power. This hidden flaw, previously unrecognized, forced regulators to demand urgent redesigns across multiple Rolls-Royce engine families. The aircraft itself, registered GYMMM, was written off, the first hull loss of a Boeing 777. Scrapped in 2009, it remains marked a sobering lesson for aviation safety. 10 passengers later filed lawsuits against Boeing, with potential payouts reaching $1 million each before cases were quietly settled. Flight 38 became proof of how a seemingly routine approach can unravel within seconds, and how decisive actions can draw the line between catastrophe and survival. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961. On November 23, 1996, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 became the stage for one of the most harrowing hijacking tragedies in aviation history. The Boeing 767, carrying 175 people, was en route from Addis Ababa to Nairobi when 3 men stormed the cockpit, brandishing a fire extinguisher and claiming to have a bomb. Their demand was impossible. They wanted the jet flown to Australia. But Captain Lul Abate, a veteran pilot who had already survived 2 previous hijackings, tried to reason with them, explaining the aircraft carried fuel only for its short leg to Kenya. But the hijackers, convinced by an airline magazine that the plane could fly 11 hours nonstop, ignored the warnings. As fuel dwindled, the 767 coasted dangerously low over the Indian Ocean near the Comoros Islands. Captain Lul made a chilling announcement, telling passengers one engine had already failed and that a crash landing was inevitable. Moments later, both engines died. Forced into a desperate ditching, he aimed for shallow waters near Lagalawa Beach. But as the hijackers fought him for control, the jet struck the sea at over 200 miles per hour, cartwheeling into pieces. Tourists on shore, believing at first they were watching an air show, captured the horrific crash on video. Of the 175 on board, 125 perished, including the hijackers and 6 crew members. Many who might have survived drowned after inflating their life jackets inside the sinking fuselage, a tragic reminder of how critical safety instructions can be. Among the dead was Mohammed Amin, the famed Kenyan photojournalist. Yet there were also remarkable survivals. U.S. Consul General Franklin Huddle and his wife lived, later crediting a last-minute upgrade to business class. Flight 961 was the first wide-body jet ever ditched on water. Its legacy remains a chilling lesson in hijacker desperation, pilot resilience, and the razor-thin line between survival and catastrophe. United Airlines Flight 1175. February 13, 2018. Started as an ordinary day for the 363 passengers aboard United Airlines Flight 1175 from San Francisco to Honolulu. But high over the Pacific, cruising at 36,000 feet, the calm was shattered by a deafening bang. The Boeing 777 lurched violently, the autopilot disconnected, and the aircraft shuddered under the force of a catastrophic engine failure. Passengers peered out their windows to see the right engine stripped open, its cowling ripped away, exposing a mangled core that looked torn apart midair. In the cockpit, the crew, 3 seasoned pilots, declared a mayday and began emergency procedures, shutting down the failed Pratt & Whitney PW4077. They descended to a safer altitude, all while vibrations rattled the frame and the cabin crew braced passengers for a tense landing. Just minutes later, videos taken from inside the cabin spread across social media, capturing the terrifying sight of metal flapping in the wind. Yet despite the chaos, the landing in Honolulu at 12:37 p.m. was smooth, controlled, and astonishingly uneventful. Every single one of the 378 people on board walked away unharmed. Investigators soon uncovered the culprit, a fractured hollow core fan blade. The blade, made from titanium alloy, had shown small cracks during earlier thermal acoustic imaging inspections in 2010 and 2015. Both times, inspectors dismissed the anomalies as paint defects. That oversight allowed the weakened blade to stay in service until it failed dramatically over the Pacific. Shrapnel from the brake tore through the engine inlet, punctured the fuselage near passenger windows, and left permanent scars on the jet. The Boeing 777, already 23 years old, was repaired and returned to service, but the incident forced sweeping changes. Pratt & Whitney increased inspection frequency, regulators mandated stricter standards, and Boeing began redesigning its engine covers. Lawsuits soon followed, with passengers seeking more than $1 million each for trauma and emotional distress. British Airways Flight 2276. September 8, 2015, was meant to mark the beginning of a transatlantic journey from Las Vegas to London. Instead, British Airways Flight 2276 became the scene of a fiery emergency that could have ended in catastrophe. Just seconds into its takeoff roll at McCarran International Airport, the Boeing 777 roared toward 90 miles per hour when the left GE90 engine suffered an uncontained failure. Metal tore loose, fuel lines ruptured, and fire erupted, blasting flames into the fuselage. In the cockpit sat Captain Chris Henke, a veteran with 30,000 hours of flight time and only a week from retirement. Alongside his two fellow pilots, he made a split-second decision to abort the takeoff, far below the 170 miles per hour decision speed. Brakes slammed, evacuation began, and 170 people scrambled down emergency slides as smoke and fire engulfed the aircraft. Emergency crews doused the blaze within 5 minutes, but 20 people sustained injuries, many from the frantic escape. One passenger was hospitalized with serious injuries. The investigation revealed the cause. A stage 810 spool in the high-pressure compressor fractured from fatigue cracks, breaking apart and breaching the engine case. The detached fragments ruptured the main fuel line, feeding the fire. The finding was alarming. There had been no inspection procedures in place that could have caught the flaw in time. Despite a gaping hole in the fuselage and heavy damage to the left wing, engineers determined the aircraft could be repaired. By March 2016, after extensive work in Las Vegas, Victorville, and Cardiff, the jet returned to service. But for Captain Henke, the event was decisive. He announced that BA 2276 would be his final flight, closing a career with a life-or-death decision that saved 170 lives. The accident underscores how seconds of clarity and decades of experience can stand between survival and disaster. DHL Airbus A300. On November 22, 2003, just minutes after leaving Baghdad International Airport, a DHL Airbus A300 carrying only 3 crew members was struck by a surface-to-air missile. The weapon slammed into the left wing at 8,000 feet, igniting fuel and shredding hydraulic lines. In a heartbeat, every conventional control on the jet was gone. The massive aircraft began lurching wildly, nose pitching up and down in violent swings. Captain Eric Gionet, First Officer Steve Michielsen, and Flight Engineer Mario Rafael faced the kind of scenario that had doomed other aircraft in the past. With no hydraulics, they were left with one tool: engine thrust. By carefully adjusting power asymmetrically, they learned to turn, descend, and even line up for an approach. Rafael manually dropped the landing gear, a move that increased drag and gave them a fighting chance at control. 10 minutes after the strike, the crew aimed back toward Baghdad. Their approach to runway 33 was unstable, the damaged wing leaking fuel and threatening to fail completely. At 400 feet, turbulence nearly rolled the jet, but the crew fought it back with split-second throttle changes. The aircraft slammed onto the ground off-center, skidding into rough terrain and tearing through a razor wire barrier before grinding to a stop. Against every expectation, all 3 men walked away without a single injury. The aviation world was stunned. Awards poured in, recognizing the extraordinary skill that turned near-certain death into survival. Both engines were ruined, the wing mangled. Yet the A300 was later repaired and re-registered. The incident became the subject of documentaries and safety case studies, a stark reminder of both the vulnerabilities of commercial aircraft in war zones and the sheer ingenuity of a crew under fire. It remains one of aviation's most dramatic escapes. Southwest Airlines Flight 1380. At 32,000 feet over Pennsylvania on April 17, 2018, Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 turned into a fight for survival. A Boeing 737-700, carrying 149 people, had just departed New York when its left engine ripped apart, tearing away parts of the cowling. Shrapnel struck the fuselage, shattered a window, and in seconds, the cabin depressurized with terrifying violence. Jennifer Reardon, a passenger seated at row 14, was partially pulled through the window. Despite the desperate efforts of fellow travelers and flight attendants, she later died from her injuries. 8 others were hurt, and the aircraft itself was deemed too damaged ever to fly again. At the controls was Captain Tammy Jo Schultz, a 56-year-old former Navy fighter pilot with more than 11,700 hours in the air. Alongside her was First Officer Darren Ellisor, a seasoned Air Force veteran. When alarms blared, the jet rolled 40 degrees left. An oxygen mask dropped throughout the cabin. The cockpit crew wrestled the crippled plane under control using skill honed over decades. Schultz ultimately guided the aircraft to a hard but safe landing in Philadelphia, where emergency crews met the wounded. The investigation revealed a fatigue crack in fan blade number 13, a flaw that had gone undetected in previous inspections. Debris from the engine was later found 60 miles away in rural Pennsylvania fields. The National Transportation Safety Board concluded the failure exposed design vulnerabilities, pushing Boeing and regulators to call for stronger inspections and redesigned components. Each replacement blade carried an estimated cost of $8,585, but the expense was dwarfed by the lessons learned. In the aftermath, Southwest gave survivors $5,000 in compensation and a $1,000 travel voucher, while facing lawsuits and a temporary dip in bookings. President Trump personally honored the crew at the White House, and Captain Schultz shared her story in a book titled Nerves of Steel. The flight's harrowing 20 minutes became a case study in aviation safety, a testament to calm leadership in chaos. Delta Airlines Flight 128. Christmas Eve turned into an unforgettable night for nearly 200 Delta Airlines passengers when their Beijing to Seattle flight was forced into an emergency landing on Shemya, a remote Alaskan island. The sudden detour came after the crew detected a possible engine issue, a chilling prospect when crossing the icy Pacific skies. A Delta spokesman reassured the public that safety remained the airline's highest priority. Thankfully, no injuries were reported, but the experience rattled those on board. One traveler even posted online, bluntly noting that he was still alive, capturing the mix of relief and shock that spread through the cabin. The location of the landing added to the drama. Shemya is home to a U.S. Air Force base in the middle of the ocean, the kind of isolated place most people will never see in their lifetime. Passengers found themselves stranded there for 12 long hours while waiting for a replacement aircraft and fresh crew sent from Seattle. In an unusual turn of events, Delta dispatched not only a plane but also technicians and customer service agents to the island, showing just how seriously the airline took the emergency. For many passengers, frustration gave way to relief once the ordeal was finally over. One man summed up the mood perfectly, joking that the experience had given him a great story to tell my grandchildren. The comment carried a dark humor, a reminder of how close the flight had come to disaster. Stories like this highlight the razor-thin line between routine travel and life-threatening emergencies. A Christmas Eve flight meant to bring people home for the holidays instead turned into an overnight lesson in resilience, patience, and the unsettling reality of flying thousands of miles above the ocean with only one working engine.